Tonight, former Hedley frontman acquitted in a high-profile sexual assault case.
Ultimately, he had a different version of events than the complainant, and he must have been convincing to a jury.
Jacob Hoggard cleared a unanimous verdict in northeastern Ontario. A deadly inferno. Ferocious flames engulf a historic Montreal hostel.
Some fatalities are unfortunately expected.
The criminal investigation and the concerning connection to another fatal incident. A landmark ruling on reimbursement. Canada's highest court paves the way for better air passenger protection.
This is a great win.
Plus, shock over a food delivery driver's apparent distasteful act.
Why would you spin my drink?
And the find of a lifetime.
I've found some significant things over the years, but not to this level.
How a priceless Canadian masterpiece landed in a Long Island barn sale.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. Canadian musician and former Hedley frontman Jacob Hoggard has been found not guilty of sexually assaulting a young woman in northeastern Ontario 8 years ago. Jurors deliberated for less than 6 hours before delivering the unanimous verdict. This was Hoggard's second time on trial for sexual assault. CTV's Eric Tashner is outside the courthouse. Eric.
Heather, when the not guilty verdict was read out, Jacob Hoggard breathed a sigh of relief and was wiping tears away from his eyes. There were a few gasps in the courtroom when the jury read its verdict. Hoggard had been accused of sexually assaulting a Kirkland Lake woman after a post-concert bonfire after-party. Hoggard took the stand during the trial and testified that what occurred was a consensual one-night stand. The Crown unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accuser did not consent to the sexual activity that took place.
What we did want to say is we want to thank the jury, the judge, for their time in this case and for the energy they put into making the decision. Okay? Thanks very much, folks.
Hoggard's lawyers declined to comment to reporters outside of the courthouse, quickly getting into their vehicle. Hoggard, however, remains behind bars as he serves a 5-year sentence for a different sexual assault conviction, a case these jurors did not hear about during this trial. Back to you, Heather.
Eric, thank you. Consent was the central issue in the trial as both the Crown and defense agreed Hoggard had a sexual encounter with the complainant in his hotel room in Kirkland Lake in June 2016.
I think he told a good story. Ultimately, he had a different version of events than the complainant. You could see that coming out when the defense lawyers were cross-examining the complainant and putting alternative scenarios to her and alternative versions of events. And then, of course, when Hoggard took the stand, he played that out. He expanded upon those ideas. And he must have been convincing to a jury because ultimately they found in his favor.
A Toronto woman is facing charges in 3 separate homicides in 3 Ontario cities in 3 days.
When we have someone who's committed 3 offenses in a real tight time frame like that, there is a risk of them obviously committing further offenses. So I'm grateful for the dogged determination shown by our investigative team. I think by definition, she is a serial killer.
Police believe 30-year-old Sabrina Calder is behind 3 murders this week in and around Toronto. They say 2 of her victims, both male, may have been randomly targeted. A woman in her 60s who was found dead inside a home on Tuesday was allegedly known to the suspect. That woman is yet to be identified. A massive fire in Old Montreal is under investigation tonight. Police confirm they pulled 2 bodies from the rubble this evening, but they don't know how many other victims there may be. Flames ripped through a building containing a restaurant and 19-room hostel. The building is owned by the same man whose other property was destroyed by a deadly criminal fire last year. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin reports.
The century-old building caught fire in the early morning hours. Witnesses described ferocious flames that appeared to start in a wine bar on the first floor and spread quickly to a hostel with 19 rooms on the 2 upper floors.
I mean, it was burning down the lamp pole, the light pole. It was very scary.
Firefighters deployed ladders and rescued 2 people, but faced major obstacles getting to other potential victims.
Around 2.5 hours after the response, a part of the building collapsed.
Police major crime and arson units took over the investigation of this suspicious fire. But officials say they simply don't know how many people they're searching for, how many are missing.
We are unable at this time to confirm the number of fatalities or their identities. Investigators are also continuing to determine exactly how many people were in the building when the fire broke out.
They've asked anyone who is missing a loved one to call in to report that. And at this moment, they say this is a difficult investigation, difficult scene. History seemingly repeating itself here. The owner of this heritage building, Emile Benamor, was also the owner of another building in Old Montreal, less than a kilometer away, where 7 people were killed in a criminal fire in March 2023. The father of Charlie Lacroix, an 18-year-old woman killed in that fire, says this seems like an awful repeat of that day. In the aftermath of that fire, the city said it cracked down on short-term rentals and inspected all of Benamor's buildings. Some guests say they had seen concerning issues at the building where the fire broke out today.
There's also an electrical panel in that corner that basically had a rat's nest of wires sticking out of it, just a whole bunch of wires coming right out of the panel.
The fire department said it had ordered the landlord to fix issues and that changes were made and that this building was deemed safe. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
A shocking act by a DoorDash delivery man has been caught on camera. Watch as the man walks up to a home in Whitby, Ontario, appears to take off the lid and spit in it. Seconds later, he is confronted by the homeowner.
Why did you, this is for my son, my 2-year-old son. Yeah. Why would you spin my drink?
So sorry, sir.
Why? I want to know why you did it.
I don't know.
For what? We tipped you. What's the problem?
No problem.
DoorDash says he is no longer with the company. Police say he was charged for failing to properly secure his 2 children in the vehicle. A major victory for travelers today as the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the Air Passengers Bill of Rights. The High Court dismissed an appeal by a group of airlines that challenged compensation rules. CTV's Judy Trin on what this means for flyers.
They just ghosted me at that point and never responded.
Nolan McGee has been waiting for more than a year for Air Canada to compensate him for a flight to Rome that was delayed for 24 hours. His chances of getting some money back has improved with the Supreme Court's unanimous decision to uphold travelers' rights. Canada has regulations that force airlines to compensate passengers for delays within their control on international flights.
Generally, the consumer should get compensation, and the airlines should be able to anticipate things like crew shortages, some weather events, and keep their maintenance up so that they can't start putting everything into this exception box.
Once again, this is a final boarding call for Porter Flight 105.
The stronger consumer protection rules took effect in 2019. It provided set payments for delays and damages to baggage. The industry argued passengers were already covered under an existing international treaty, but the High Court disagreed. The International Air Transport Association is disappointed with the court's decision and says the federal government needs to focus its efforts on improving the overall air travel system.
But while it is a victory, it stops things from getting worse.
But it could still take months, even years, for passengers to get paid. Since 2019, more than 150,000 claims have been filed with the Canadian Transportation Agency, including 22,000 so far this year, all contributing to a backlog of 79,000 cases. Legal challenges by the airlines have now been defeated in Canada and the European Union. Consumer advocates will use this Supreme Court ruling in countries where airlines are fighting similar laws. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
Turning now to the latest in the Middle East, an Israeli airstrike has cut off a main highway linking Lebanon with Syria. The road traveled by tens of thousands fleeing the conflict in the past 2 weeks, now unusable. This as people were warned to evacuate more communities in southern Lebanon. CTV's Adrian Gobriel reports.
'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. 'Adrian Gobriel reports. Air raid sirens and the sounds of explosions echo across the Israeli-Lebanon border tonight as clashes continue on the ground between Israeli troops and Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon. Dozens of additional towns and villages have been ordered by the IDF to evacuate, many pondering just how far Israel will go.
Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, has said that the next step should be and may well be attacking Iran's energy and perhaps nuclear infrastructures.
President Joe Biden expressing his frustration by the lack of a diplomatic solution to end the war.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. 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 And I think Bibi should remember that.
As smoke rose with the sun once again this morning in Beirut, the life and death challenges facing civilians and aid workers are becoming painfully clear.
We are witnessing continuous bombardments and a lot of escalation across the country.
In the last 2 weeks alone, 400,000 people have become displaced in Lebanon. The path to leave the country has become even more precarious as an Israeli airstrike near the Syria border stranded those desperate to leave. Israel's military says it struck an underground tunnel crossing to prevent weapons from being smuggled into Lebanese territories.
It's either staying in Lebanon with that growing risk on their lives or taking the decision to go back and cross the border to Syria.
Thousands packed Tehran's Grand Masala Mosque today with the yellow flag of Hezbollah seen among the masses. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khamenei, appeared in person to lead Friday prayers for the first time since 2020, calling this week's strikes on Israel by Iran a service to all of humanity. Iran's supreme leader adding that his military will attack Israel again if necessary. This comes as the entire region braces itself for what might come next. Heather?
Thank you, Adrian. The situation in the Middle East is looming over leaders at the Francophonie Summit. The Prime Minister is at the event hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron. CTV's Jeremy Sharon is also at the summit and has more on the pressing themes. Jeremy.
Heather, the Francophonie Summit officially began this morning with a visit to Villers-Cotterêts, a small city north of Paris. The Prime Minister was greeted by French President Emmanuel Macron. Much of the focus so far at this summit has been on tech, innovation, artificial intelligence, and the role French language speakers should play as leaders in those industries. The Prime Minister took part in a session on the challenges French language speakers face in this digital era. Canada is expected tomorrow to announce $16 million in funding to support French-speaking African country members of La Francophonie. That money will go to several initiatives, including bettering education and supporting and empowering women and girls. Now, much of this summit has been overshadowed by the growing tension and concern about escalation in the Middle East, specifically between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israeli forces. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly is part of the delegation here in France. She spoke to her French counterpart today. Much of the focus of that conversation was on Lebanon, the situation there and the concerns they have. Both France and Canada have been calling for a ceasefire in the region. She'll meet tomorrow with a Lebanese information minister who is here representing Lebanon. The Prime Minister was supposed to be here. Lebanon is a member of La Francophonie. Of course, the Prime Minister could not make it due to the situation in his country. Much of the focus here has been on what is going on there. In fact, the organization of La Francophonie is expected to issue a statement tomorrow, a collective statement on the situation in Lebanon. Heather?
Thanks, Jeremy. Coming up, an emotional reunion. Reconnected 6 months after risking death for a better life. It was a reunion 6 months and thousands of kilometers in the making. Last January, W5's Avery Haynes trekked the Darien Gap, documenting one of the world's most brutal migrant routes. Tonight, we bring you the final part of her series, Narco Jungle, The Death Train, as Avery reunites with two young cousins she rescued in the jungle.
We've traveled the length of the Mexico-U.S. border in our search for the cousins we rescued in the Darien Gap, lost and alone in the jungle.
Pero tengo demasiado miedo, no puedo estar sin mi abuela. No puedo ir a otro lugar sin mi abuela.
Okay, I'm making a decision. They're coming with us.
Out of the jungle, they were whisked away to a safe house. Now, 6 months later, and thousands of kilometers from the Darien Gap, we've tracked them down.
Francibel.
For the first time, I meet the grandmother Francibel was crying for in the jungle.
Gracias. Gracias por estar ahí en esos momentos que ellas estaban tan solas. Gracias.
Francibel says when they were taken to the safe house, they were threatened with being put up for adoption.
Many people were saying that my grandmother had fallen into the river and was dead. I kept thinking, no, that can't be true.
After 5 agonizing days, her grandmother and aunt emerged from the jungle, along with Kendra and Francibel's little brothers.
The man from immigration said to me, "What are their names?" And he showed me a photo. For me, that day was, oh my God, they are alive. I took a deep breath and cried and hugged them and said, thank you, God, they are alive.
They thought the worst was behind them as they traveled through Central America by bus. But the real nightmare began when they crossed into Mexico and were kidnapped by a cartel.
They were all armed, and they said if we moved, they would hurt us.
And the girls were crying, men with weapons, bad people, with their faces covered. They were looking at the girls. My God, now what do I do now?
The family paid the ransom and was set free. It used to be that anyone who stepped foot on U.S. soil could claim asylum, causing surges like this. Now they have to use this app to book an asylum appointment. It's essentially an online lottery. Fewer than 1,500 appointments are available daily. So migrants apply daily. On average, the app is accessed a staggering 5 million times a month. Francibel and her family are still trying to get one of those appointments, and so they're hiding out in this border town safe house.
My grandmother says you learn from the hard knocks. And I've learned many things already, that life is not easy. I have to keep pushing, because I really want to be someone in life.
And you can watch Narco Jungle, The Death Train, a 1-hour documentary, Saturday at 7 p.m. on CTV. Still ahead tonight, the barn sale fine that could fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars. A long-lost painting by one of Canada's most famous artists has been rediscovered. The Emily Carr original was found hanging in a barn in the Hamptons and purchased for just $50 US. CTV's Kathy Lee has the story.
The piece isn't particularly big, but captivates its admirers.
It's so fresh and it's so clean and so nice.
A grizzly bear perched on a memorial totem pole, this 1912 painting by renowned Canadian artist Emily Carr had quite a journey to Hedley Gallery in Calgary.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked. When I saw the news about it, I just immediately stopped everything and came over.
A few months ago, an American art dealer found the painting at a barn sale in the Hamptons and paid $50 US for it. At the time, he wasn't aware of Emily Carr's work or legacy.
But you still could tell it had something, otherworldly about it.
The painter was known for being ahead of her time. Most of her pieces depicted First Nations communities in her home of British Columbia.
She recorded the times, she recorded that history which would have been lost without her.
And now that history can be enjoyed again after being found and returned to Canada. Art industry experts say it's actually worth up to $200,000.
It was also all original, nothing had been touched to the work, so it has Carr's original frame, original stretcher.
I've found some significant things over the years. important, but not to this level. Rarest find I've ever found.
It's believed the rare find made its way to the Hamptons after Carr gifted it to a friend on the East Coast in the 1930s.
To touch the works, handle them.
But now that it's home, it's up for auction.
I would like it to go to a collector of her work or a museum,
so that it can be appreciated in the way the special piece should be. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Coming up, mapping a mind, the big discoveries from a tiny brain. We leave you tonight with an intriguing look inside the mind of a fruit fly. As CTV's Garrett Berry explains, the small discovery could have a big impact on future research.
Long a thorn in the side of farmers, gardeners, and homeowners, these tiny creatures offer more than meets the eye.
The closer you look, the more surprised we as scientists are. So, for example, we know that they can walk and fly, and those are actually pretty complicated things.
New research, published in the prestigious journal Nature, is giving a look inside the complex brain of the tiny insect. It took a team of researchers spread across more than 100 institutions to create a full brain map of an adult female fruit fly. The wiring diagram includes 140,000 neurons and more than 50 million connectors, or synapses, which are the connections between nerve cells. This is the most complex brain that's ever been mapped in full.
You can recognize the same neuron in one fly brain and find it in another. So we can study this dead brain and relate that to neurons that we can then go and find in the flies we have in the lab.
Artificial intelligence cut down the task from what was likely to be millions of hours of work. Computers made the first models, then humans went back in to double check. But as impressive as that is, it's nothing compared to the complexity of a fruit fly.
They also can learn and remember things, quite complicated forms of learning. They can navigate, so they have a sense of which direction they're going.
And not only is this tiny brain impressive, it's impressively efficient, performing all those tasks with ease.
If you think about the amount of power, microwatts that it takes to power a fly brain, versus a similar computational device, made in silicon, there are many orders of magnitudes of difference. And so I think that's another thing where people will be trying to learn lessons.
While human brains seem to be a million times more complex, some researchers hope this is a first step towards creating a map that could give insight into human nervous systems and disorders like Parkinson's and depression. Garrett Berry, CTV News, St. John's.
That is our newscast for this Friday. Thank you for watching. Good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow.